Glory to Jesus Christ. So I was going to wait a little bit to make this video, give it a few days to sink in and get my thoughts. So, as we know, Pope Francis has passed away, and we are currently in the mourning process, getting ready for the conclave to determine who the next Pope is going to be. And I wanted to give my thoughts on that. So, Francis was my first Pope as a Catholic. I mean, there have been other popes in my lifetime, but I was an anti-Catholic Protestant during those times. So I was an anti-Catholic Protestant during JP2. I was an anti-Catholic Protestant during Benedict. And because of that, I didn't really pay very much attention to those pontificates because I was under the anti-Catholic Protestant belief that the papacy was evil, that the Catholic Church was evil, that Catholics were being brainwashed, and blah, 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 blah. You all know the deal. It was during Francis's papacy that I really started looking into the Catholic faith. I had a conversion call from God, had a personal experience with Mary, all of that came together into my conversion. A lot of personal things in my life that I'm not going to get into right now here. It all played into it. But one of my obstacles in becoming Catholic was I really misunderstood Pope Francis on a lot of things. I really did. I would see some of the off-the-cuff remarks he would make when he was put on the spot, and he really was not the best public speaker. We know this. He would get put on the spot a lot, and then he would often try to find ways to respond that would avoid conflict in a lot of ways. And a lot of times that would make his response sound like he was being wishy-washy, or that he was giving ground to the other side, and it was a whole thing. But as I was digging into what he was saying, I realized that most of what he was saying, there was actually a good reason for it. There was actually a good meaning behind it when you actually look at it. And when you actually look at it through a charitable lens and not just coming at it with a bias of, oh, what he's saying must be wrong, I need to jump on it first thing. And when I was looking through his formal documents, I would see news headlines that were just flat out wrong about what he was saying in the document. Like, he would say one thing in the document, but the news, like mainstream media, would pop up and say that the document said something completely opposite of what it actually said. For an example, we can look at Fiducia Supplicans, which I've done videos on Fiducia Supplicans before, but we can look at Fiducia Supplicans where the document specifically says that gay marriage is prohibited, that it is not permissible in the church, and that you can't bless sin. But you would see mainstream media headlines saying things like, Pope allows gay marriage, and Pope blesses gay marriage, and blah, 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 blah. When that is not actually what the document said at all. That's the opposite of what the document said. And I realize that we're living in a social media era where the Pope was constantly under a microscope from all directions, from mainstream media, from social media, from individual Catholics, from anti-Catholics, who a lot of them had their own agenda to push, their own biases to push. And the guy couldn't make a single off-the-cuff remark without it just getting psychoanalyzed into oblivion. He was also living in a time where leftist ideology is just flooding the world. And it was flooding the church. We were living in the era of modernism clashing with conservative traditionalism in the church. And while I don't agree with, for example, his restrictions on the Latin Mass, or necessarily with his comments about traditionalists being too rigid, I get where he was coming from. He was trying to find a way to bring some unity in the church while still maintaining both sides. I don't agree with how he did the restrictions, but I get where he was coming from, and I don't envy the position that he was in at all, because I'm looking at it at what I would have done if I was in his position, and I'm not really sure what the solution would be. I don't think what he did was the best solution at all, but I also don't know what the solution would have been. And then we look at the issues going on in Germany. We look at what the German bishops were doing, where they were basically being schismatic, and he was trying to figure out how to deal with them. I mean, he could have excommunicated them outright, sure, but we have to look at what kind of effect that would have had on the church as a whole over there. Like, there's a lot of parts that play into decisions like that. And while we could just sit here and say, oh, I'd excommunicate them outright. Yeah, but what's going to be the fallout from that? It's really a big game. And I don't mean to use game in the entertainment sense, but it's really a big game, and you've got to figure out how to play it. And I don't really know what the solution would have been. Now, personally, I would like to just throw all the games out the window and just say, this is how it's going to be done, because this is what the church teaches. This is what the church has always taught. This is what we're going to do. And if you don't like it, get out, because this is Christ's church. And as JP2, I believe it was JP2, as JP2 said, even if we're reduced to just 12 again. But I also know that there are a lot of moving parts that I don't know about. We don't know how the Holy Spirit was pulling him in certain directions. We just don't know. So I'm trying to be very charitable here in looking at what he did and why he did it. And then we look at the part about holy orders for women. We saw a lot of people who thought that he was going to try to institute holy orders for women. Not that you can, because that's not how Jesus intended it. That's not how Jesus established it. But a lot of people thought he was going to try to do that. But then he had the interview where they asked him flat out about women deacons, and he just said no. And it was super based response. And I think a lot of people started to realize after that they weren't really understanding who Francis actually was, or what he was actually trying to stand for. I don't think he was the best pope. I don't. I don't think he was the best pope by any means, but I do think that he was trying to take a down in the trenches approach to the pontificate. He was trying to push Catholics to actually be out in the field doing the work instead of just being armchair quarterbacks. And then we also look at all the challenges that he was facing as the Pope during the pandemic, trying to figure out how to manage the church during all of these things going on with that whole situation. It's just, there were a lot of things that he had to deal with that I would not want to be in his shoes dealing with those. So I've always really tried to be charitable with him, and now that he's gone and we're looking at the next potential pope, we can be tempted to try to play politics, to try to campaign for certain people, but in the end, the Holy Spirit is in charge of that. Jesus is in charge of that. God is in charge of that. It's the Trinity that really decides who is going to be in that seat. Now, we don't know if the Holy Spirit directly selects the Pope or influences the votes to go in that way, or if the Holy Spirit just kind of allows it to happen and then works around that. But we do know that it is all God's plan, and that no matter what happens, God's plan is going to prevail. Because we know that the gates of hell will not overcome the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We know this. That's a divine mandate. So we need to remember that the church will not fall. The church will go through challenging times. Our Lady has told us this, but the church will not fall. Glory to Jesus Christ.